together unite. Miners and dockers join the general strike. 250 million rally to the call. The rising of the farmer is the rising of us all. All the world is watching as you scheme and dispossess. We demand a future where no one is oppressed. Narendra Modi, we are not your fools. Get out of our way, it's time for us to rule. We march to Delhi, we march across the land. Farmers, workers, Zindabad. We march together, united we stand. Farmers, workers, Zindabad.
I've lived in Britain for 45 years. I came here as a teenager. I've never seen Punjabis, Sikhs to be as engaged, to be as emotionally affected by something that's going on at the moment as we are now. My son and I went on a drive-by demo outside the Indian consulate on Sunday. He's only 10 and he's half white. It was a fantastic way of him understanding about the other half of his heritage. And we've had good conversations, and we came home and I was watching a video of a song, which is a really beautiful song. This crowd that's mesmerized, that's really fired up by this song. And this crowd is just shouting one word, Zindabad, which means long live. So I was sitting with my son and I started crying. And he sidled up to me and I explained, and he said to me, he sort of, hugged me and he says, "Dad, we will win. This government is really evil. We are going to win this struggle," he said.
Here's to the farmers, they march from near and far. They come from Ludhiana, Jalandhar, Amritsar. They come from Haryana, Punjab and Rajasthan. They hear and they've drawn a line in the sand. Modi, are you listening? We are not afraid. 200,000 tractors cross your barricades. Red, green and yellow, turbans in the sun. A tidal wave of workers, the fight has begun. We march to Delhi, we march across the land. Farmers, workers, Zindabad. We march together, united we stand. Farmers, workers, Zindabad. The hungry cities, we feed the rural poor, we feed the teeming masses from Leeds to Lahore. Our rice, corn and sugar feed the people of this land. We won't let the rich rob the harvest of our hands. We will not surrender our right to MSP. Fair rates for our labour, prices guaranteed. No more suicides, poverty or debt. At last the tide is turning and we have no regrets. We march to Delhi, we march across the land. Farmers, workers, Zindabad. We march together, united we stand. Farmers, workers, Zindabad.
midst of this, the police were not just beating people up, they were actually hosing people with cold but also filthy sewage-filled water.
You hosed us with sewage, you beat us with clubs, you tried to divide us with spies and thugs, put spikes in our roads and shut down the net. Still we stand in peace, we defy your threats. We won't bow down to multi-millionaires, reliance on Adani, corporate profiteers. Bayer and Monsanto will not seize our land. Repeal the bloody farm laws, this is our demand. We march to Delhi, we march across the land. Farmers, workers, Zindabad. We march together, united we stand. Farmers, workers, Zindabad.
When the media started really amplifying their poisonous kind of propaganda, a lot of farmers who felt disheartened started leaving. And their leader at that point, I don't know, something turned in him that day. He said from the stage, "I am not leaving," he said, "and they're going to beat us up and they're going to destroy us, and they will try and do the same at the Punjab and Haryana borders as well," he said, yeah? So he says, and then he said tearfully, he says, "I would rather take a bullet in my chest, I would rather hang myself than leave this place here." And literally people turned on their heels. And the next day, more people attended that demo.
Nurses and teachers together unite. Miners and dockers join the general strike. 250 million rally to the call. The rising of the farmer is the rising of us all. All the world is watching as you scheme and dispossess. We demand a future where no one is oppressed. Narendra Modi, we are not your fools. Get out of our way, it's time for us to rule. We march to Delhi, we march across the land. Farmers, workers, Zindabad. We march together, united we stand. Farmers, workers, Zindabad.
Thank you, Bill, for that. I think we should congratulate Banner Theatre for producing that video, but actually applaud the historic struggle of the Indian farm workers. So Zindabad.
Zindabad.
Our first speaker is Roger Mackenzie. Roger is now the General Secretary of Liberation, which was the movement for colonial freedom that played such an important role for decades in Britain in the anti-colonial movement around the world. We need to build Liberation and its magazine as a home to peace and anti-war movements, anti-racist groups and solidarity organisations to provide the anti-imperialist context without which those struggles cannot really win. So I'm delighted to introduce Roger. Roger, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Moz. It's really fantastic to be part of this meeting. And can I echo the thoughts of Moz in terms of solidarity to the Indian farmers. It's truly a magnificent battle that they waged and a magnificent victory that they won. And it's something that fills me with an enormous amount of enthusiasm for the battle ahead, because people would have been telling these farmers there is no point in standing up against Modi. He's all powerful. They would have said. This is the might of the state against you. You cannot win. They won, and it shows what happens when we stand together in solidarity. And what I want to do in this brief contribution is talk a little bit about another aspect, another way that imperialism, colonialism is playing out at the moment, before I talk a little bit about what we can do collectively together, working through liberation with other comrade organisations as well. The aspect that I really want to talk about, comrades, is about, because it is all occupying for me at the moment. One of the things that occupies my mind the most is about the COVID-19 virus and the way that that's playing out at the minute, and the way that the richest nations on the planet, but also the richest companies on the planet, are benefiting directly from COVID-19. And the way that companies, Johnson and Johnson for one, but many of the other major companies, some of the richest companies in the history of the world, are refusing to share the technology around their vaccines. Now, that's bad enough at the best of times for that to be the case. But actually what we're seeing now, as we've seen in the last couple of days reported, is this new variant on COVID-19 across the southern nations of Africa. And many of us have been arguing for some time, and I have to tell you, it's not often I find myself on the same side, actually ever really, as Gordon Brown, but actually I am, because what he's been saying echoes what Liberation has been saying for some considerable time now, and that is none of us are safe unless all of us are safe. And what's happening is there is a deliberate decision being taken by companies not to share their technology because they don't give a toss, frankly, about what is happening across those southern nations. They're concerned about money, plain and simple. They're concerned about increasing the already eye-watering levels of profits that they are making from these vaccines. Vaccines, incidentally, that we've all paid for. And this, for me, is part of the discussion. This is not something that they've just come up with in terms of their own money as companies. And there's whole discussions, of course, about where that wealth comes from in terms of working people producing the vaccines. And I'll come on to some of that in a minute. But we have given them money for research, and they have taken that as their own and then produced these vaccines and refused to share it to save the lives of people across the world. Less than 5% of the African continent has had one shot of the vaccine. And there's the story, of course, of Johnson and Johnson. I've mentioned them already. Johnson and Johnson, who produced the vaccine down in South Africa, where we're seeing this new variant come from. They produced this vaccine down there, paid people a pittance to produce it, and then decided what they were going to do was to take the vaccine up north, up to the northern countries. And that's what they did. So people who actually produced the vaccine couldn't get the vaccine, and the people that were making the money off it decided to make more money and sold it to northern rich nations who hoarded the vaccine. And of course, many of these politicians who are taking that decision to hoard the vaccine in these rich nations of the north are bought and paid for by these massive uber rich companies. Now, we have to understand, I think, the reason why I'm talking about this, apart from the fact that I'm so angry about it, is that I think we have to understand the new way, or the developing way, I should say, because it's not new to see companies acting as nation states, because we saw this, as other people on this call will be able to see with, for example, the East India Company, the way that they were effectively a state, of, a nation state in their own right, a company behaving as a nation state. And that's what we're seeing now. But actually, I think we're seeing a further development of that, with these really rich, powerful companies actually controlling even more than they did before nation states like the United States of America. And we saw recently with the Pandora Papers that was produced on an investigation, the way that these companies hide their riches in these tax havens. And these tax havens aren't even a surprise. They're not even secret. What's secret is the way that you can get into them, get access to them. And I think we have to understand this if we're ever to develop a way of being able to organize against these companies, organize against these nation states, to be able to make a real difference for working class people who, frankly, are struggling to survive. All of the things that we're talking about this afternoon are not things about tomorrow and the way that imperialism might impact on things tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We're talking about the way that things are impacting people now. There are people who are literally, you will all know, struggling to put bread on the table, struggling to keep a roof over their heads. So the politics that we talk about in this discussion isn't some theoretical thing about the way that we want to see the world develop in the future, although we should offer people a vision for the future. But it's about practical means of organising around what is happening now, today, in this world, where people are just struggling, as I said, to survive. So what is the role that we can all play through liberation? Well, as Moz was saying earlier on, liberation, formerly known as the Movement for Colonial Freedom, set up many years ago, 70 years ago, I think it is nearly, to fight against specifically at the time, it's set up to fight against the Mau Mau rebellion. And what people were being told at that time, as the Indian farmers were being told, is there's no point, that things will take their own course and the rich are just too powerful for you to be able to do anything. Well, we reject those arguments. And what we say is that when we stick together in solidarity, we can make a difference and we can bring about real change. Now, what we need to do through liberation is to work out ways of bringing about that real and fundamental change. And it's not just about by having nice theoretical discussions about these things, as important as having the theory right is. But what we have to do is to work out what practically we can do to make a difference. Now, I have to say that, when I worked, as some of you might know, I used to work for Unison, and I have to say that one of the things that I saw across the trade union movement was when people talk about solidarity, what they actually mean was sending somebody on an expensive trip somewhere. And that's not what I'm talking about. Solidarity trips are important, of course they are. People need to see us sometimes, and that's fine. It also isn't about some kind of colonialist philanthropy of some kind, where people think all we've got to do is identify somebody to give some money to because we've got a load of money. Money is important. People need money, of course it is. But on its own, that's simply not going to cut it. What we need is to understand the class dynamic of this. We need to understand the politics of what's behind this. And why I say that is because unless we understand the politics, the class politics behind this, then we'll never understand why it is that people within these rich companies that I've been talking about, these eye-wateringly rich companies, richest in the history of the world, and these rich nations of the global north, why it is that they feel that they are able to get away with what they do get away with, why they feel it is in their interest to exploit working class people across the globe, why they feel it is all right to divide workers against workers in the global north, who are often from the global south. So me, I'm a descendant of a family who were enslaved from the Tikar people of what is now in the Cameroons, and enslaved and taken to Jamaica, where we were worked and killed, and then the subject of colonialism once slavery was ended. So I'm clear about a number of things. I'm clear that none of the victories against the end slavery, the victory to end colonialism, none of those things happened out of the goodness of somebody's heart. They did not happen because somebody woke up one morning and decided that things needed to change. They ended because people organized, because people stood up and fought and resisted slavery, and fought and resisted colonialism. So the picture I've tried to paint is one where colonialism is not a historical phenomenon and it's something that has just gone. This is something that we live with now, where people divide us against each other still as a justification for the way that they treat us over here, because they can divide us against each other as working class people, but also for the way that they treat people in other parts of the world. So I want to say, comrade, I think it's time that we looked at a reinvigorated way of fighting against the colonialism, the militarism that we experience now. Because unless we understand that we need to not just adopt the ways of the past to be able to fight against these evils of colonialism, but we need to identify new ways of organising, new means of solidarity, and some of the technologies like we're using today give us that opportunity to build an international solidarity. And that's where I want to leave it with just these final words, if I may, Moz. No one's ever done this stuff for us. Nobody has decided one day that they're just going to, out of the goodness of their heart, just be more benevolent, in inverted commas, to us, or give us the things that we demand. We've always had to stand up and organise and fight as working people for what we believe in. That's all. That historical fact is true, but it's also true today. And what I'm urging you all to do, and Bill messaged me to say that one of the proposals that you are looking at is a way of bringing together some groups within the Midlands around the Liberation Banner to look at how we can work together to raise these issues of anti-colonialism, but also importantly to make a real difference, to fight the racism that comes out of it, and to build the movement that's going to bring about that irreversible and fundamental shift in society in favour of working class people. We are the ones that we've been waiting for to achieve that. There ain't nobody else who can do it. It's always down to us. Thank you, comrades. And my apologies, I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole meeting, but I just want to express my personal solidarity and the solidarity of liberation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Always very clear and bringing to our attention the very real impact of imperialism in real time with the issues that we face now. Talking to my grandkids age between 17 and 4. So talking to the older ones about imperialism, they've got no concept of imperialism at all, and there is a task for us to actually deal with that in our families, in our trade unions, in our wider trade union movement. So Roger, thank you. I want to introduce Pierre. Now, Pierre is a leading member of the Young Communist League and also a member of one of our party branch in Leicester. The YCL, the Young Communist League, has grown very quickly recently and is attracting attention from both our workers' movement and indeed from the state. And examples of that can be seen in the repressive action aimed at them through the COP26 demonstration in Glasgow, where the Young Communist League were kettled. They were kettled, and it was, and I watched the Facebook footage of that, it was heartening for me to see the crowds as they marched, shouting, "Let them march, let them march." And the Young Communist League actually breaking out into the Internationale. It was a great moving moment for me. Anyway, the thing about that was they have received messages of support and solidarity for them from our movement, and that includes the Midlands TUC. So I'm delighted to introduce Pierre. I'm really interested in what he's got to say. And so, Pierre, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Moz. I'm in Leicester, and I'd also like to pay tribute to the Indian workers, the Indian farmers. When they won their struggle, you saw there were cars beeping their horns, people driving around the city with flags and things, and there was a great enthusiasm. And I think that we in Britain on the left share that enthusiasm. You know, we love to see our comrades in India winning their victories. So yeah, the Young Communist League is a member of the World Federation of Democratic Youth, which is a international organization composed of youth groups who work on issues of peace, socialism, and anti-imperialism. Those communists and also national liberation movements. And there's a great deal that we can learn from these other movements that we're part of. For example, the chair of the organization can't be at this meeting. I'm replacing him, but he's at the moment at an international event with comrades from Western Sahara. And these kinds of international links are quite important. You know, going to talk with people who are contesting colonialism in their own countries, and going to show our support and learn from their struggle. Yes, and as you mentioned, there was the COP26 demonstration. We received a number of statements of solidarity, and also other groups who, just contacted us to say that they were outraged at what was going on and that they had seen the police activity. We received sympathetic statements from Cyprus, Spain, Portugal, and also Syria. And this again shows the importance of being part of an international movement, that when things happen in Britain, other movements around the world look at what's going on, and they're deeply interested in our struggle, and we are deeply interested in theirs. For example, at the end of this month, Barbados is due to become a republic and to replace the Queen as the head of state. And this again is something where the international movement is leading far beyond what we are capable of in Britain. And again, full solidarity with the Youth Socialist League of Barbados. Young people in education face a great deal of pro-imperialist propaganda in the form of militarist video games. There's the Prevent program in schools, which suppresses any kind of voices which contest imperialist narratives. Back in the 1980s, the YCL had this pen pal program between youth in the socialist countries and in Britain. I don't know if any of the pen pals were too genuine, but nonetheless, there was this ongoing dialogue which went on between youth in Britain and youth around the world. And what I find interesting is that today there is a kind of a renewal of that that process beyond just the statements that you might hear, coming out of the media about Cuba or China or Vietnam. You now have organisations like the I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but the Chow Collective, who work on issues of imperialism in China, against China. And there's Luna Oi in Vietnam, who, does these sort of telling people about her life and how she lives in her country, which I think gets across a lot better the kinds of conditions in which people live, the realities of living in a country which is under constant attack by US imperialism, and the daily lives of people around the world. And I think that's what the Young Communist League does and is striving to do in promoting a politics of solidarity and understanding between young people.
Thank you, Pierre. Very informative, and I'm sure lots of issues for us to pick up on. I don't know, Marios has got I think Marios has got a question for Roger. Big business determining and controlling economy more than ever before. How do we challenge the notion of people who say the politicians are corrupt? At least businesses are good at creating wealth, jobs, and getting things done. Oh, just while I give Roger a minute to think about that, I'm very mindful when I think of big business. I live in the Derbyshire Dales. Our bins are collected by workers employed by Serco. And about 6 weeks back, our bins haven't been collected for 4 weeks. And Derbyshire Dales did an online consultation about bin services, which seemed rather an odd thing to me to be doing at the time. Anyway, I was obliged to comment and ask, when I talked to the workers and said, our bins haven't been collected, they said, no, there's not enough workers employed to collect the bins in the Derbyshire Dales area, and they're not paying workers, Serco, enough money. Now, this was within a very short period of time following Serco just being re-granted the test and trace contract. So I submitted a response in the consultation that said if Serco had earned all these £163 million in order for test and trace, did that mean they didn't give a toss about our bins now? Serco workers actually took strike action, and they have won a very successful dispute, taking short-term focused action. I, of course, encouraged everybody in our village to respond in a similar way to the consultation. I'm sure that show of solidarity might have helped. But anyway, Roger, I don't know if you've got, if you want to come in on the economy being controlled. I've had a message from someone to say that their internet has gone down. I should say there's also the danger of my internet going down. And if that happens, Pablo there on the screen is going to take over. Okay, Roger, your screen.
Did you know you were going to take over, Pablo? That's the thing. Before Muzz just said that. Anyway, I think the question, Marios, thank you. I mean, for me, I think the evidence is increasingly clear to even people who wouldn't say that they're involved in politics, that it's not just a whole bunch of politicians that are corrupt, but a whole bunch of business people that are corrupt as well. I think we have to concentrate on what it is that we can do, and what we can do is concentrate on building a movement. And what I mean by building a movement is people not just having closed meetings every month or something and just chatting with each other. I'm talking about having a movement that is going to go out and engage with people and have conversations with people in communities and in workplaces. And for me, that's what makes the difference, because what I see countless times throughout my life is that people learn during struggle. And that it becomes really obvious to people what is going on around them if people are engaging with them and moving people away from the dominant kind of conversations that are taking place. So if we're able to do that and have direct conversations with people, then I think that makes a difference. I also think as well that this is another reason for us to build the Morning Star, frankly, because I think we need more people reading the only daily anti-racist newspaper, frankly, the only daily anti-imperialist newspaper, the only daily newspaper that is prepared to talk about workers' struggles. And when we can get more people to engage with our paper, and I'll confess I'm on the management committee of the Morning Star, but I think everybody should be reading it anyway, and I did before I went on the Morning Star management committee. That I think that we need to use that organ as a means of organising. So it shouldn't just be something that people read if you're in the Communist Party, on the left of the Labour Party or whatever. It should be something that we're getting out to as many people as possible, particularly the Thursdays that I write in the newspaper, when you can read the article that I write from Liberation, as you will be able to next Thursday. But it is, all joking aside, it's a vital tool for us in terms of building that movement, where we can get out the information about what are politicians actually doing, the way that so many politicians are actually bought and paid for by business up and down this country, but actually even more can't even think of the word, but more worse than that is the way that it's not even business in this country that's buying politicians in this country. It's business from across the world that is buying politicians in this country, and that's something we have to get across to people as well. And I'm heartened by when I see comrades at Weetabix and so on who are standing up against fire and rehire, and I see the same things happen elsewhere where that system is being. People learn from struggle, and we have to be the ones who are going and engaging with people when they are in struggle, so that they understand the politics. Because, by the way, and this is the last point I'll make, Mars, if we don't, then what we know is that the far right will go in and they will blame migrants and they will blame refugees, and they will turn people against each other in the way that capital wants us to be against each other.
Absolutely, Roger. And I don't want to cause you any pain, but I did say right early on that you and I were both members of Unison, and we worked on some of the same committees, different capacity. I was on the NEC, you were Assistant General Secretary. But I've got to say, our class and our union members, Roger, will sorely miss your focus and commitment to building workplace organisation from the bottom up. It's a travesty. Anyway, I'm glad to see you've kept the focus of building that movement that we've talked about so much in the past and taking that into liberation. And I also want to thank you. You set us all a task, but I also want to thank you for your introduction to the Morning Star. I see you've already got a request for to speak at the Morning Star supporters group in Yorkshire when they're back to actual meetings, or it may be in online, focusing on liberation. So I'm not surprised to see that. If you actually look at the Morning Star online, you'll see that the focus isn't just on the issues that you've raised about about COVID, about homelessness. It's about all the key issues that face our class, including French and English. Today's headline, French and English racist border regime actually causing the deaths of people. So all the issues we look at today are the issues that directly affect our class. And there is a real challenge as to how we build that movement. Now, I can't see if there's any questions posted from the Facebook pages, sadly. So I'm just, if either of our tech supports can help me with that and alert me to them, I'll try and raise them. But I'll just ask now. Okay, I'll just ask now whether or not there's anyone on the screen that wants to ask anything. Otherwise, stick your hand up or put your yellow whatnot on, your yellow wavy hand. Steve, is that you waving? Yes. Okay, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, no, it wasn't. Just my internet's gone down completely. I'm having to come in from my phone. So no, that's if I'm doing strange movements, that's more panic than anything else. Okay,
that's fine. Not to worry. I know Roger had to leave by 3 o'clock anyway. So I'm going to suggest we take if there's no. Oh, hang on a minute. I've just got one. I don't know if you can see what Carrie has just put, but she's following on from my comments about workers and Roger's comments about Weetabix workers taking action against hire and fire, and just letting us know that in Sheffield there are a number of strikes in and around Sheffield, stagecoach, food couriers, university staff. And there have been some good wins, the cleaners at the University of Sheffield. That we don't publicise our successes enough, I think, because the workers in Derbyshire Dales, the Serco workers in Derbyshire Dales, were successful. There are other Serco workers employed in Sandwell who are already fighting against fire and rehire. It looks like they may have just received an offer to end their dispute from Serco. So there are lots of successes taking place that we have to build on. I've got a question from Karen to Roger, and it's about liberation. Does liberation have local groups?
And only kind of really informal ones at the moment, but it is something that we're looking at whether this might be a way forward. You know, along the same lines as the Morning Star readers groups. For me, that's a model. I'm only sounding hesitant here because I haven't had this discussion yet with other colleagues in liberation, and it is one that I want to have, because for me, we can't just be asking people to join liberation and not give people a vehicle to become involved in liberation. It doesn't make much sense to me, and at the minute I just think that there's a gap there where if we adopted the same sort of model as the Morning Star readers groups, where people can come together and look at how they can work together on a local level, then that seems to me to be a real way of taking the anti-imperialist arguments into local communities and into local workplaces as well. I should say as well, one of the other things about many of the kind of disputes that we're seeing up and down the country at the moment, many of them involve lots of migrant workers. When you look around care, when you look at some of the issues around Uber, Deliveroo, some of those disputes, lots and lots of migrant workers involved in it. Now, for me, I think we can begin to argue that these are ways of bringing workers together, breaking down this kind of artificial, kind of manufactured barrier of well, because you're from Latin America, because you're from a different part of Africa or whatever, then somehow you're different to white workers within this country. This is a way of uniting people together in the sort of struggle that I talked about earlier on. So I think a lot of those disputes we can use as a way of almost being anti-colonial, anti-imperialist kind of disputes, because you're actually bringing people together rather than dividing people, which, as I said before, is what so many employers, well, it's in their interest to do, to have us divided against each other.
Absolutely. Thanks, Roger. I think Bill's got a question. Right.
Yeah, I have. I suppose it's it's a question. We're talking a lot about the workers' struggle in Britain, as well as obviously the anti-colonial struggle of people under the cosh of imperialism. And sometimes people only recognise imperialism as an army invading another country and taking its resources and all the rest of it. The obvious sign of imperialism, but that sign of the multinational companies buying politicians, as Roger said, that is worldwide imperialism, and they'll go wherever and divide whoever. And the question is, I suppose, there's a lot of people who want to build an anti-racist movement in Britain, but who don't want it to be, in other ways, political. They don't want to recognise the roots of racism and imperialism, or in class politics, because they fear that it will put people off. They talk about building as broad a front as possible, and therefore you can't really get too political about it. I've found that that's not been a successful way forward throughout the last 50 years that I've been involved in that area. People are confused because it comes down to who's a good person, who's a bad person, who has bad ideas, who has good ideas, rather than seeing the root of it. And I mean, liberation, I think, Roger, sets out to be an anti-racist movement as well as an anti-colonial movement, and maybe that's where we need to go to try to build that understanding. And that is relevant to what the Serco workers in Derbyshire Dales are doing with their bins, because Serco is an exploitative imperialist country backed by the state and backed by all the mechanisms of imperialism. So these struggles are interconnected, I think.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question, which is Dick's.
There's one question I was also going to ask, that there seems to be a sort of growing rise in identity politics, which, okay, there's certainly a need for, sort of black people, various minorities, to have their case and have their interests recognised. But it tends to be the case that, I don't know if you think about it, there's a danger of class politics being elbowed out of the way, which shouldn't actually be the case. I wonder what your attitude to that one is, and how we actually get a way around that one to make sure that class politics is the overriding difference there is in society.
Well, I mean, there's many better people than me who've got a better theoretical background than I have who could answer that. But for me, the way that I've always approached my organising over the years, always been a big supporter and an organiser of black self-organised groups across the trade union movement and across political parties. That's always been something that I've done. But at the heart of all of that, has always been an understanding of the way that class plays out. And I know that there's always been this argument: is what predominates, what comes first, class, race, whatever. To somebody who's struggling to put bread on the table, who is struggling to survive, I don't think they'll be impressed with us getting involved in that argument, frankly. I think they'd be more impressed in what are you going to do? And that's not to diminish that argument, because I think it is an important, not argument, but an important discussion about the interplay between class and race. But does one predominate over the other? I think they both influence each other, if it was me. That would be where I'd be coming from on it. I think Cedric Robinson, who wrote Black Marxism back in 1983, always talked about racial capitalism. I don't know. I'm still reading about all that and still trying to learn about all of that. But for me, that's quite a strong argument, it seems to me.
Thanks, Roger. Right, I'm going to thank both our speakers today. I'm going to close this session, just this first part of the William Poole meeting, not the whole thing, just to allow you to go and get a quick cup of tea, because if we were at William Poole physical, we'd be at the bar getting a drink. So it's your chance to get a cup of tea or coffee or do something. Come back in. You don't need to turn your computers off. We'll restart at 3 o'clock. We will have Asadullah Ketchmand with us. Then he's been at another meeting, so he could only join us at 3 o'clock. Roger, I've got to say goodbye to you because you're leaving us at 3 o'clock. So thank you very much for your contribution today. Look forward to those ongoing discussions. Just keep the 18th of June free next year, will you? Because we might be wanting a speaker on liberation at the Silk Mill Festival. Thank you, everybody. Bill's gonna, I think, load up the second video that we're going to be opening up the second part with. That's why we need a bit of a break. So see you all in 5 minutes, comrades. We'll restart at 3.
Sorry.
Hi, comrades. I'm going to call you all back in now. Hopefully you've had enough time to replenish yourselves. I can see Asadullah is here with us now, so welcome, Asadullah. Just to let everybody know that Asadullah Ketchmand is replacing Naveed Shamali, who had some important business, urgent important business he had to deal with. So we'll hear from Asadullah in a little while. Sorry, we're having a few technical difficulties with the other video, so so I'm going to suggest we move on, particularly as we have 3 speakers in this next session. So first of all is Joginder Baines. Joginder is a leading member of the Indian Workers Association nationally and locally. I hope Joginder can hear me and is able to put a camera on in a minute. So Joginder has spoken very tellingly on a national broadcast by the People's Assembly on Black Lives Matters. She spoke on the origins of racism and imperialism and for class unity rather than identity politics. So Joginder, I'm really pleased you've been able to join us today. I hope the preparations for your celebrations are going well tomorrow, and I will try to post in the chat box, if you're not able to, the details of how people can donate towards the benefit tomorrow, the celebration for the Indian farmers, but also in recognition that over 700 farmers have actually lost their lives and their families should be supported. So Joginder, I'm going to hand over to you. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Mars, and thank you for inviting me to this this meeting. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all. Thank you, CPB. Thank you, Paul William Society. Thank you, all the individuals who have supported the farmers' struggle in passing resolutions, sending messages of solidarity, writing to Indian High Commission, raising funds, donating money towards the farmers' struggle, and I think it means a lot to us here, and it means a lot to the farmers over there. And they have said it many times, that whenever they receive a message from our associates, friends, and organizations, parties, political parties, it means a lot to them. It raised their morale. So thank you for all that what you have done. Comrades, this is the 4th victory by the farmers in India. The very first 2 were from the imperialist power, British imperialism. The very first one was in 1905. That was initiated and led by Sardar Ajit Singh, who is Bhagat Singh's uncle. You may have heard about him, together with Lala Lajpat Rai. Second one was in 1938, led by 5, initiated and led by 5 members of Gadar Party that started in America and Canada. All those members were members of Communist Party of India. Both times they won. They won the imperialist power, who you can imagine what could have, how vigorous their fight would have been. The third one was in 1960s against the Congress government, and that was against the betterment levy that was imposed by the Congress Party, but that was only in Punjab, and that also the farmers won. However, this one is different. This one has made a history. Those three had made a history too, but this one was the biggest one and well organized, spread all over the country, and there is not a corner of the country that doesn't know about this struggle, and there is not a part of the world that doesn't know about the farmers' struggle that has been taking place in India. Comrades, it's a victory that Modi has announced to repeal the three farmers, but it is not victory yet. So we have won one victory, but there are several others yet to be won. And also, we must remember that this victory is not the farmers alone. It is a victory for global working class, because the struggle is not just organized to have the three laws repealed, but it is people's struggle. People's struggle against privatization, against capitalist system, against neoliberal policies, against imperialism, against WTO, against World Bank, against IMF. And that is what we all are struggling for. These are the organizations, these are the institutions that hold the purse string, and they are the ones who make the decisions and pull the governments to accept what they say, when all the countries are sovereign countries, but somebody else pulls the strings. It is a struggle to save our planet from climate change. It is a struggle against fascism, comrades, and that is something we must remember. The danger from fascism, Indian fascism, and Modi is equal to Hitler. He is a fascist leader. It is a struggle against Hindutva ideology of BJP and RSS. It is to protect the interest of minorities. Nonetheless, compared to the previous struggles, the current struggle is the biggest in the world history. It has been peaceful. I mean, can you imagine? Just imagine such a large gathering. How do you keep it peaceful? That is magical itself. Well organized, and it broke all social, religious, caste, class barriers. And that happened first time, that there is no class, there is no religion, there is only farmers and workers together. They have been struggling. It's the Modi government has used every weapon possible they could. Use the water cannons, tear gas, cars ran over the farmers, killing 4 farmers and 1 journalist. Beating with lathis, serious injuries. Lathis are big bamboo sticks, very strong bamboo sticks, and that are used by the police quite often, and that was the case during the empire as well. Seriously injuring dozens of them, inciting violence by the ministers and chief ministers. Their tents were ripped, burnt, and much more, and still the struggle stayed relatively peaceful. The farmers have been labeled Khalistanis, which is the separatists, Sikh separatists, agents of Pakistan, China, extremists, Parjivi, which means parasites, Andolanjivis, the ones who feed off protests, foreign destructive ideologists. We should, and he said to the nation, Modi said, that we should be aware of all these people. Barriers were placed, trenches dug up. Can you imagine? Large spikes were placed in the road, stone walls were erected, preventing farmers from entering Delhi. 700 farmers lost their life, but still they remain calm. They did not let the unity of workers and farmers weaken, but strengthen the unity. Each time Modi and the police or the government did something, it didn't weaken them, strengthen them, and strengthen all the communities and religions. It is because of the network of resources that farmers could continue the struggle. It is the resources that were coming from the communities. And one shining, they have become fish in water in real sense. Donations did not stop coming. Even now, the donations are coming, not only in money, but buses were made into bedrooms. Washing machines were donated, tents, food, medicine, shoes, blankets, and much more. Gurdwaras. We often shy away from the religious organizations, but I would urge you, please go back and please learn more or read about history of Punjab and history of Sikhs. We, the Indian communists, cannot function without knowing about the Sikhism and Sikh history. So I would like you to do that, please. Women played an excellent role whole of the time. They looked after farms, helped each other, looked after the family, organized groups to and from borders, drove tractors. They told their husbands, and children told their fathers, don't come back empty-handed. Otherwise you will not be allowed to come in the house. Better be dead than come home empty-handed. They rotated to come to and from the protest. Comrades, it is an example. It is an example for us all. They turned all borders into villages, all 6. There are 6 villages now, with mini hospitals, schools, shops for essentials, libraries, doctor clinics, pharmacies, community kitchens. One doctor came from America and he's still there. One hotel owner opened his hotel, shut his business. He opened his hotel for the farmers. And he said he started from 0 and will not regret if he come to 0 again. Farmers must win. That is what he said. A lady, elderly lady has been there for a year. She mend farmers' clothes or make clothes for them. Farmers roamed throughout the night, making sure that everyone was safe. They have made new friends. I'm sure they will cry. I'm sure they will cry when they have to leave that place. They started growing their own vegetables there as well. It is really heartwarming to think, to see when we see these things happening, that how they have managed, how they did it. Now back to Modi. Modi underestimated the fighting spirit of farmers. He thought they will soon return home, but seeing their strength and increasing support coming from all over the world, his own party started to turn against him and the government. Only a day before, one day before, a chief minister of Telangana, who is BJP chief minister, he declared war against Modi and his government, saying that if the solution is not found sooner for the farmers' demand, he will wage war against Modi and BJP. And that is what difference the farmers have made. BJP started losing election after election. In UP, BJP started to lose grip and are likely to taste a defeat. It was the fear that forced Modi for U-turn. He knows if UP goes, he will not win 2024 general elections. Watch the language he used. He still doesn't say that he was wrong. He says that he has been unable to convince our farmer brethren. And he says that he has done tapasya. I don't know how to pronounce this in English. It is penance. That when you really pray to the God and really, I don't know how to explain it in
Penance.
English.
Penance.
Penance, yeah.
Penance. That has been fruitless, he said. He did the tapasya. That's beyond anybody's thought. Comrades, he passed the laws undemocratically, and he made the announcement undemocratically too. It was a surprise to everyone. Nobody knew this was coming. The laws are made in parliaments and can only be repealed in the parliament, but he alone made the announcement. Again, he thought farmers will leave. They will return home. But farmers or not farmers, no one believed him. No one trusts him. He is the biggest liar ever in the history of in Indian history. Farmers want all three acts repealed by the parliament, and they are not going anywhere until that has been done. That's what they say. MSP has been farmers' demand all along from 2017. Modi has not said a word about. He has not said a word about 700 farmers who have lost their lives. So farmers have decided to stay put until MSP Guarantee Act is passed. Swaminathan report has debated in the parliament. Electricity Reform Act has been repealed. All farmers in prison have been released and the sedition cases on them have been withdrawn. Until 700 farmers' families have been compensated. Until the Home Minister Ajay Mishra Teni, whose son ran the car over the 4 farmers, and Manohar Lal Thakkar is the Chief Minister of Haryana, are removed from the public office. A committee has been formalized to engage farmers for the future strategy. The farmers have decided to stay put and they are not moving. They are continuing their struggle. Yesterday was 1 year since farmers started their protest at the border, although it started in June last year, June 2020. And that turned out to be gigantic once again. It was huge. More and more people who were there already, but more came to make the mark and to be there on that historic day. Comrades, the Indian farmers have taught us some lessons and how to fight. No one dared to stand up to Modi and his government. They have been the ones after women. We must not forget the Shaheen Bagh women who also stood up to Modi government against CAA. And that we must not forget ever. And these two groups have given us the courage to fight back BJP and their Hindutva ideology. Struggle, even the farmers, all the demands by the farmers have been met. The struggle will not be over, comrades, because it is a struggle against fascism. It is struggle against fascism. It is struggle against capitalism. It is struggle against privatization. And that is the struggle we must continue together. Because it is a danger not only to India, but to world over. We must defeat the fascistic ideology and Hindutva ideology. We can't afford to stop at farmers' struggle when it is over. Thank you for having.
Absolutely right, Jaginder. Absolutely right. And I want to thank you for bringing us right up to date and making it really clear where the Indian farmers now stand, why it's an important issue for us, imperialist agribusiness, why we need to get involved in it, why we need to be opposing the takeover of the World Trade Organization, the World Bank into farming. And I also want to thank you for introducing the role of women farmers into your contribution, because there are many thousands of women farmers in India. And yesterday you commented about the march yesterday. Yesterday, of course, was the UN International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So an excellent roundup of what's actually happening. So thank you, Jaginder, for that. I want to move on to our second speaker now, Asadullah Ketchmand, who is a Central Committee member of the Afghanistan People's Democratic Party, which formed the government back in the 1980s and against which the imperialists, I'm not quite sure what happened to my screen there, against which the imperialists led by the United States of America plotted, colluded, armed and trained political Islamists, who in turn later became the target of their cynically named War on Terror, until the recent developments that saw the return of the Taliban. Asadullah was ambassador to Iran, Ethiopia and Hungary for that brave government which brought about such progress during its time in power. So I really want to welcome Asadullah now to contribute to the discussion. Asadullah, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you very much to invite me to talk about Afghanistan. And I want, in the beginning, emphasize that unfortunately my English is very, very bad. That just I try to speak in English. Generally, I speak in French, but anyway. So first of after all, I want to express my apologies before. So Afghanistan actually is posing a very, very difficult situation. Maybe the Afghan people in the region is the most unhappy people by the event which happened in this country. In 1980s, the Afghan people had the chance to choose his destiny to change the life. But unfortunately, the intervention of the American and Britain imperialists by help of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the other countries posed a lot of problem to our people, and they created a very, very difficult situation. So since that time, our people has suffered a lot by the intervention, different kind of intervention of this international reactions. In the 80s, it was by organizing the counter-revolutionary groups to bring the war against our people, later on to bring on in the power the so-called Mujahideen, and later on to have a neglected attitude against the Taliban till 2001. And finally, when in 2001, Americans intervene and occupied Afghanistan, they tried from the beginning to elaborate a very, very complicated and satanic strategy, which we see the results now. It means then when the Taliban have been thrown out from the power in 2001 till 2006, they had no big activities. But in 2006, the first activity, large scale activities of Taliban started, and it was seen by American, by how to tell it, they allowed Taliban from that time to grow up. In fact, since that time, there was no any war, real war against American in Afghanistan. The war, it was exactly against the Fantosh government of Afghanistan and the Afghan people, but the Americans and NATO and their allies, so they have been in Afghanistan, but the real war didn't target these forces. So the strategy of American, it was based on create a situation to open the way of a war in Central Asia, which today we are in this situation. They have transferred very easily the power to Taliban, the power of a regime with 350,000 people of army, strong with 350,000 people with $85 billion of equipment. This power is transferred to the Taliban. So, what is the aim of this strategy in this situation? Taliban, it's a government of one ethnic, one religion, one spoken language people. They ignore all the other different ethnic, religion, and religion. I mean the different sects of the Islamic religion, like Shiite and the others, and also they are neglecting the right of women, the right of different region, etc. So there's a very exclusive power of a very fanatic and in French it's called cultural, ethnic, religion power. So this power is now is strong in Afghanistan. They are preparing in the future to be support for the aggression against the Central Asia. I think the main aim of the Americans after the occupation on Afghanistan was to open the way of the war and the disorder in the Central Asia and the Xinjiang of China. That's why they have created the situation and transferred the power to the Taliban, because for this purpose, they need a strong power, a power very homogeneous, homogene in French, a homogeneous power to when they to create a situation of the so-called Central Asian Spring. Excuse me, my English, it is very, very bad. I cannot express my all my thought. Anyway, so now the situation in Afghanistan is very complicated, and the Afghan people need urgent help from the progressives in the world, because so this Taliban regime put in danger all the success of 20 years of life in Afghanistan, which was one with the occupation of Afghanistan by American. One side was the occupation has used the situation of Afghanistan to make more strong their position against the neighbors. On the other side, there was a kind of democracy as well, which came in Afghanistan. There was the right for the women. There was a liberty for the freedom of the party, of the speech. So all this again will be are in danger by Taliban, especially the right of the women and the right of the different ethnies and right of different sects of religion. The Taliban tries to oblige some people from some region to leave their home, and the Taliban, they occupy. It means one ethnic. It means the Pashtuns, they are coming to replace the people who left for the centuries in that areas. So there's a very big danger for the unity of the people in the future. That's why the international progress movement, they have a large area of cooperation and to help with the Afghan people. They can put on pressure via democratic institution the Taliban and to guarantee a minimum of different rights in different areas. It means for the ladies, for different ethnies, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, etc. So without this international help, the Afghan people will suffer more and more. One thing is, after the collapse of the former regime, a big part of the intellectual left the country. The Americans, Britons, NATO, and the others, they brought out with them a big part of the intellectual of the countries. And the situation for Taliban, it is empty. the Taliban, it means that there will be less contest against Taliban, less idea, less thought, less organized protest against the Taliban, etc. So, from one hand, they have been obliged to go out from the country. But the other hand, they create a situation for Taliban to govern more easier the country. There will be less intellectual, less contestation, less progress. That's why there's a very complicated situation in Afghanistan. The progressist forces in Afghanistan, they are expecting a lot of help from the international solidarity. This solidarity can manifest by different form. Via different organizations, they can put pressure on the Taliban via their government, their organization, and their practice. That's why our demand to the comrade in Britain, especially is in some precise area. First of all, we need some strong voice, some strong help, some strong support to the wish of Afghan people for the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom for the ladies, freedom for the organization, and also we need some support. Then the progressist forces put on pressure their government. Then they, for the recognizing Taliban, they should put some conditions. Their conditions, I told you that they are very clear. Some equality between different ethnia of Afghanistan, equality between different region, different religion, different language, especially actually in Afghanistan, the Persian language, which is the language of spoken language of almost 80% of the population, is banned in the official in the administrations, and everybody is obliged to speak in one language, which is Pashto. Of course, Pashto is our language, our national language, but one of our languages. But the Farsi is completely banned, and also in Islam there are two important sects in Afghanistan: Sunnite and Shiite. So the Shiite sect is banned. Around we have no the exact figure, but the estimation tells them that there are around 30% or 25% of the population is Shiite. So they're Shiite, they cannot practice openly their religion. That's why there is a very big injustice in Afghanistan. And the Taliban, if there is no strong support from the international to our people, the Taliban can implement very easily their policy of negligence and the exclusion. As an Afghan, once again, I use this tribune to request from my comrades to organize some form of pressure and the demand for to help the Afghan people. Excuse me, I am very, very sorry to to not be able to express come with when like I like my ideas, so that is why so I finish my thought. Thank you very much for your attention.
Cashman, thank you. Cashman, you don't have to apologise, because I think your passion has come through in the contribution that you've given today, so clearly laying out the imperialism that has taken over your country and destroyed the democracy that existed within it. And you've done that very, very clearly. You have nothing to apologise for. I just wanted to let people know that you have given a long interview to the Young Communist League, and that is due to be published in Challenge magazine next month. So please, if you want to know more and develop your knowledge about Afghanistan, get a copy of Challenge, and you'll be able to look at how you can develop the solidarity actions around the freedoms that Cashman has identified for us today. Yeah, I've got messages saying it's coming through loud and clear, comrade. Thank you. So you have nothing to apologise. I want to move on to our third speaker today. The title of this session today is Imperialism versus Workers of the World. I think collectively our speakers are very, very clearly laying out for us just how that is demonstrated around the world, the threat to workers. And our final speaker today is Oliver Dodd. He is co-director of the Centre for Study of Social and Global Justice. He's also a PhD student with a focus on South America. And Oliver has just returned from an important investigatory visit to Colombia. He's a member of the CPB in Nottingham. Oliver, the screen is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, comrade. And it's great to see familiar faces and new people as well who I've never met. It's a real pleasure to be able to do this brief talk today on Colombia. And I want to thank the comrades from the Communist Party in Derbyshire who are showing once again that it's always communists on the forefront of international struggles. I'm going to break up my talk into 4 parts. I think we need to talk a little bit about the history of Colombia, why it's important, and the trajectory of the communist struggle. And then the reaction to the development of the communist struggle in Colombia by imperialism. And then I'll talk a little bit about the peace agreement that was signed between the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, in 2016, before looking at the reaction so far, the present conjuncture, given the development of the peace agreement that was signed. Now, the first thing I would like to start on is why Colombia? What is special and peculiar about the country itself? And the first point I'd like to make is that the geography of Colombia makes Colombia important to imperialism, but it also makes Colombia strategically important to anti-imperialists. The fact that Colombia is the gateway to both Central and South America, that it provides strategic access to the Panama Canal, which is really a crucial economic and strategic point for imperialism in its domination of the Latin American region. But Colombia has also got the potential for a very balanced economy. It's never been dependent historically on one particular or two particular resources. It's got minerals, fertile agriculture, the potential for strong industry, which makes the struggle for socialism, a really fruitful endeavor. It's also got minerals, lots of different types of minerals. Colombia borders 5 different countries, each of which that historically have been relatively ripe for revolution. Of course, on the border with Colombia, we've had Venezuela, who has the largest oil reserves in the world. And it was recently revealed that one of the reasons that the British imperialism has had an interest in Colombia is precisely because of these petroleum resources. A journalist recently revealed for the magazine Declassified that British imperialists, British planners were very interested in trying to prevent the development of communist struggle in Colombia precisely because of the kind of alliances that can be formed with Venezuelan socialists and communists and progressives. Now, those are some of the three key geographical reasons for the importance of Colombia to imperialism, but there's also a more subjective element. And this subjective element is based on the Colombian Communist Party's history and decisions itself. In the 1930s, the Colombian Communist Party was quite unique in that it tried to analyze the Colombian society, its political economy, using Marxism creatively. Unlike other communist parties in some countries, the Colombian Communist Party was about 50% made up of the peasantry, which was quite a peculiar development compared to some other countries such as Venezuela and Ecuador. And so from the very beginning in the 1930s, it started to try to have roots, to mobilize, to try to build an alliance, a basis between the peasantry and the urban movements. And this was very important because Colombia's history in the 1940s took a very turn for the worse. We had a clientelistic kind of model of development in Colombia where landowners and peasants, they were subordinated to two particular dominant class political parties, the liberals and the conservatives, that essentially incited violence against each party and partisan principles. And it was this moment in Colombia's history that the Communist Party was actually able to organize some of the few areas of peace in Colombia's rural zones. Whereas the rest of Colombia was essentially at civil war, the Colombian communists intervened and established local areas of peasant resistance that were some of the few areas of peace in the entire country. And so this allowed the Colombian Communist Party to make advances, serious advances, not just in urban cities, but also in the rural areas amongst the peasantry. And I'll get on to my second part here, is that the reaction to this, once the dominant class in Colombia finally were able to, they tried to put aside their differences to some extent, they signed what was called the National Front Agreement, which essentially shared power between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. But by definition, this excluded all other parties. It was essentially a dictatorship that decided that to try to reduce the violence between liberals and conservatives, that they'd share power over time. And this lasted for some 20 years. But at the same time as this strategy was put in place to bring about peace and stability for the capitalist class, they also implemented a strategy that went after these base areas, these rural peasant zones of communists, self-defense really, that organized in socialist principles. And it was the reaction by the Colombian state in alliance with the United States. It actually allowed the United States to try out napalm for the first time before it was later used in Vietnam. But despite the kind of reaction by imperialism, the torture, the widespread torture that was used, and the attacks on these particular self-defense areas, it was at this point that the Colombian Communist Party decided that a kind of self-defense strategy wasn't working due to the aggression of the state. So they were pushed out using vast military capability supported by the United States. And then they went on to form a more mobile guerrilla strategy that tried to exploit mobility and, the countryside and all the rest of it, but also never forgetting that you can't build a revolution in the 20th century Colombia without having strong links within the urban sector. So there was never it was never either or. There was always a strong alliance between the peasantry and the urban working class. And as we saw the insurgents, the communist insurgents, particularly the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, advanced during the 1990s. They had implemented an economic strategy of taxation upon the wealthier sectors of Colombian society, and this allowed the FARC, in order to allow their members to dedicate 24 hours a day to the struggle, allowed them to feed and equip their members in many thousands. It was at this point that the United States really decided to get involved. The CIA predicted that unless there was massive restructuring of the Colombian armed forces, upgrading, that it could, there was a 50% chance of the FARC taking power within 5 years. This was in 1996 that this estimation was made. And so we saw what's called Plan Colombia. Plan Colombia was essentially a strategy to restructure and upgrade the armed forces, the air power capabilities of the Colombian state quite significantly. And there was a peace negotiations in 1999 to 2002 that were essentially exploited by the state. They used the peace negotiations as a breather, as a kind of tactic in order to remobilize, to reform and reboost their military capabilities. And so I call this peace negotiations between 1999 and 2002 as the use and abuse of peace negotiations as a strategy for war, because they were never serious about negotiating a peace. They were really trying to manipulate the situation in a way that it would allow them to wage war from 2002 onwards. And that's exactly what happened. From 2002 onwards, the Colombian military were massively restructured and upgraded, and they were able to make inroads on the power and influence of the communist rebels. They went from 22,000 communist rebels in 2002 to 8,000 when they signed the peace agreement in 2016. So there was a significant, there was inroads and advances made by the state. And at the same time, this was, it was a dirty war, widespread state terrorism. You had the situation of what's called the false positives, where soldiers had killed tens of thousands of civilians in order to collect bounties that were provided by the state. There was a really build-up of mercenaries and use of private military actors and paramilitaries to try to separate the communists from the civilian population. And so we saw between 2012 and 2016, there were movements to sign a peace agreement with the state. And this peace agreement was finally signed in 2016. And one of the things with this peace agreement, it was signed from what we could say is a position of relative weakness with the communist rebels, the FARC. There was no kind of emphasis on restructuring the military. There was a reform, a land reform, but actually it was quite a moderate reform. Many of the capitalist sectors actually saw it as a way to try to moderate tensions between certain, peasant classes. So it was almost what we could call a social democratic reform that tried to modernize agriculture, allow it to compete within the world capitalist system in 21st century terms. But there was no kind of focus on rolling back the kind of wealth and power of the capitalist class. There was also a strong transnationally orientated result from the signing of the peace agreement. And what we saw in the aftermath of the 2016 peace agreement was, private logging companies, the extractivist industries, especially petroleum companies, mining, all trying to access formerly rebel-controlled territories. So there was a strong transnationally orientated capitalist component to supporting the peace agreement. And it was also in the aftermath of this peace agreement that Colombia was the first and only Latin American state in history to join the NATO pact. So it was actually used as a kind of political and economic project to restructure Colombia's direction in the more kind of neoliberal globalization way. And of course, the moment that the peace agreement was signed with the FARC, the Colombian state then tried to take aim at Venezuela, intensified its efforts to take aim at Venezuela especially. So as a result of this peace agreement that was signed in 2002, we've seen various reactions by the communist movement, which is split, and it's grown to be further split since the peace agreement. We've got an organization called the National Liberation Army of Colombia, which is a Marxist-Leninist guerrilla group, historically smaller than the FARC, but that was also able to expand. And they were negotiating a peace agreement with the Colombian state. It's much more difficult to negotiate with the ELN. They're a bit more expired by the Cuban Revolution than what we might say is they're much more federally structured. So they incorporate trade union structures, they incorporate social movements, all into the leading organizational forms of the group. So it's a much more difficult entity to negotiate with compared to the FARC, which was a 7-man secretariat. You had a unity of action, whereas the ELN's a bit different. And of course, the ELN have been able to learn from and watch the peace process with the FARC, where many of the revolutionaries who demobilized, almost over 300 now, have been killed by state-aligned actors. And so they essentially, they've been not encouraged by the situation with the FARC. Then you've got another communist entity, which they're called Los Comunes, and this was the FARC at the time of the peace agreement. They signed the peace agreement, and they continue to fight for the peace agreement when it was signed. They argue that fighting for the peace agreement is part of a process of establishing national reconciliation. It's a process of, the defending the peace agreement is intimately associated with defending social justice as part of a kind of strategy for achieving, or at least advancing towards socialism in Colombia. A significant FARC faction at the same time didn't demobilize in the first place. They felt that it was a betrayal. This was, today they're called the FARC dissidents, los disidentes, and they're led by a number of historic FARC commanders, and they're based more in the traditional zone of Colombia, the rural south especially. But they have, based on my experience, they have about 3,000 combatants, armed combatants, guerrillas, which is a significant element, but it's significantly weaker since the 2016 peace agreement was signed. And then in 2019, we saw a large number of very significant leaders of the historic FARC decide that the peace agreement had been betrayed by the Colombian state, that they reneged on the agreement, and they've decided to remobilize. And this group is called Las FARC Segunda Marquetalia, and this is led by Ivan Marquez, who was the second highest ranking commander of the FARC at the time of the peace negotiations. He was a personal friend of Chavez, very influential person, has a long history. So it was quite a significant break, and they're slowly trying to rebuild. And I did an interview. I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes, but I did an interview for the Morning Star earlier this year in February. I went to the mountains. It was the first face-to-face interview with a senior commander of this particular group, the FARC, the Segunda Marquetalia. Since their remobilization, I went to the communities. I spent about a week there. I was able to talk to local activists, local people, civilians. And I'm just going to finish with a couple of quotes from a civilian in the area who wasn't a member, but also a leader of the group who I interviewed, just to try to give a bit of more context to the situation right now. And I'd be more than happy to go into any more details, anything that I spoke about today in the Q&A. So the first is from a community member who she was not a member. She was not particularly political at all. She lived in an area really of the FARC, and this has all been published online in my own articles. And she said the community here prefers the FARC to the police and military. They were always around to help immediately when asked. They are part of us and support us with basic needs in a difficult situation. They also helped organize the community here. Now, this is a far cry from the kind of situation in the past where you've had elite forces go into rebel areas or areas that are perceived to be sympathetic, where they're killed and brutalized with chainsaws and all the rest of it. And then there's a comment on the peace agreement by Villa Vasquez, who was the commander who I interviewed earlier this year. And he justified the return to arms, saying, all our hopes were in the agreement, but the agreement was betrayed by the government and the dominant class forces. That is why we had to return to arms. But it is not the FARC who was returned to arms, it is the people themselves. Today we can say that 60% of the fighters are new. They are not ex-members. So I'd like to finish on that, and I'm happy to answer any questions about anything I've said. Thank you.
That's great, Oliver. Thank you very much. Can I just suggest that if you've got it to hand, you put the link to the Morning Star article in the chat box. Okay, comrades, it is 3 minutes past 4, but I want to give anyone that's got we're going to have to finish in a minute, but I want to see if there's anyone who's got an urgent question that they would like to ask either Asadullah or Oliver or Jaginder. You'll see Jaginder has put in the chat box the information for any donations. Oliver has said he's prepared to answer any questions. Any that, brilliant, Oliver, thank you. He's also put the Morning Star article link in the chat box. Are there any urgent questions that anyone would like to ask? If you have a subsequent, oh, we've got 15 minutes. That's all right then, sorry. I thought we were finishing at 4 o'clock, beg your pardon, everybody. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, either Asadullah or Jaginder or Oliver, do you either want to put your yellow hand up or wave furiously at me? You'll see this room that I'm sitting in is becoming a bit dark. That's because it's getting dark outside. So sorry about that. But I see some of you have got the same problem as I have. So, right, are there any questions? Yes, there is a question from Marios. Marios.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question which can be answered briefly if you wanted to the three speakers. We have been talking about imperialism versus workers of the world. And of course, there are many contradictions in life, in daily struggle, but perhaps the biggest one is the fact that we are working class and we need to be used and abused for profit making. Within the struggles that you have talked about, what is your experience about the people's class consciousness? Has it increased, decreased, remained the same? I know it's hard to quantify, but how do you feel people are responding to the continuous, imperialism, militarism, economic control, political control, and so on? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take the three speakers in reverse order. So I'll take Oliver first, and then I will take Asadullah, and then I'll take Jaginder if there's any comments they want to make. So Oliver, do you want to come back on that? What's the level of consciousness amongst the people that you've met? Sounds pretty high to me, but
yeah. So I mean, so I've spent about 3 years in Colombia, and in total I've spent, for my research in the mountains with the guerrillas, I've spent 5 months, and there's a much higher rate of class consciousness, obviously, amongst people in areas where there is a strong tradition of socialist, communist resistance, because on the one hand, you've got the struggles that they face, but you've also got the subjective element of a party, and not just any party, but you could actually say, you know, the way that this party functions, you know, allows people to be members full time. You know, there's a real focus. You wake up in the morning, you study. You know, the party itself is also very class conscious. You can have communist parties where the class consciousness is not as firmly developed. And I would say that because of the kind of way, you know, the guerrilla groups organize in Colombia, there's a strong focus on trying to raise the level of class consciousness. And, you know, I mean, in other areas of, you know, for example, in communities where there isn't a tradition of communist struggle or socialist struggle, progressive struggle, there tends not to be the kind of level of class consciousness. And my view is, and this, you know, might not be the view of others, is you know, is partly because, you know, class can be interpreted in different ways. You've got the, you know, we know that the fascist right try to exploit you know, people's struggles, and they try to harness it and try to abuse it and try to channel people in against immigrants, for example. So just because people struggle and all the rest doesn't necessarily mean they're going to develop a communist consciousness. That's why we need socialist and communist parties. And I think that's why you know, the kind of these full-time guerrilla groups have been so successful, because they're able to root themselves in the communities. They're from the communities. They're able to control territory and prevent others from taking that territory. So that's one of the advantages. And I think, you know, and so there's uneven development, political development, economic development, and all the rest of it. I've noticed.
Okay, thank you for that, Oliver. Asadullah, I don't know if you want to make, oh, his screen's just gone blank. So, oh, Asadullah, right. I don't know if you want to make any comment on your understanding of the level of political consciousness within Afghanistan. Sorry, Asadullah, you're muted if you're trying to contribute. No, it's okay.
So first of all, the occupation of Afghanistan by Americans and NATO create a very unclear situation in Afghanistan. First of all, from the economical point of view, the Americans destroyed all the infrastructure, the limited infrastructure which existed in Afghanistan, and changed our society from a agrarian society to a society of consumption. Yeah. Today in Afghanistan, with the withdrawal of Americans and NATO and their aid, the population is starving. It's clear then the hunger. It is an enemy of thinking, enemy of conscience, enemy of finding the way. So actually in Afghanistan, the population is more occupied by the day-by-day life to how to fight against the hunger, against the difficulties of this winter. But generally, our population has some kind of very good memory from the time of the rules of the Democratic People's Party of Afghanistan, which the poverty withdrawal, which there was some kind of inequality between the population. There was a very, very large struggle against the poverty. So that is why the population is a little nostalgic of this time, and in the same time, 20 years of the occupation in Afghanistan which it was based on the base of dividing the country. Our country was divided by different ethnic, different religion, different region, etc. And the conscience of the people during this 20 years is take the direction of the division, of the survival against the others, other party, other region, other religion, other ethnic, etc. That's why this situation, it is very, very vague. It is not clear, and some region, instead of finding their enemy on the imperialist policy which was implemented in Afghanistan, they are looking for the enemy between the other factors, which it's a very confused situation in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there was no effort during this 20 years to bring up the conscience of generally the conscience of the population. That's why it is a underdeveloped society from the cultural point of view generally, except the Kabul. It was so you could see all kind of the sign of the civilization and the culture, but the rest of the country, it is a very, very underdeveloped country, and it's normal. The level of the conscience also, it is not very, very high.
Okay, thank you very much, Asadullah. Joginder, do you want to make any comment about the impact of the farm workers' struggle on the level of political consciousness?
Yes, I echo what Oliver has said, that people, when they are in struggle, doesn't mean that they are going to develop the leftist communist consciousness. Nonetheless, this 1 year farmers' protest, it wasn't that people were just sitting there. They just sat there. No, they didn't. Every day something was happening. Every day they had rallies. Every day they had public meetings. Every day they had discussed what was happening, what they were fighting against and for. Every day they discussed about imperialistic power. Every day they discussed WTO, and that happens in all 6 borders. Not only in one. Every day the leaders were going and talking to people. Every day there were dramas played. Every day there was the poetry. There was sing songs. Thousands and thousands of songs have been written during that 1 year, and the poetry and stories, the interviews, etc., etc. So actually the protest, the farmers' protest, has become a university of knowledge, because people, whoever came, because they participated in the rallies, in the meetings, and in the discussions, they were learning every day something. They were learning. Otherwise, if that didn't happen, then the struggle wouldn't have lasted 1 year. Because people were eager to learn more. That's why people keep coming, because they were willing to learn more, and they were willing to participate in the discussions, etc. As you probably know, that the farmers said no politics. That didn't mean that they didn't do politics, but what they said was that no political parties were allowed. No representatives of any political parties were allowed. And also, another thing I think we need to remember is that most of the unions are influenced by the left. In Punjab and in Rajasthan particularly, and the others as well. So where there was influence of the left, there was more education on the issues of imperialism, capitalism, etc., etc. I think, I hope I have answered.
I think you've answered that perfectly, Jaginda. And actually, I think that's a suitable point to move towards closing this meeting of the William Poole Society. I said a wee while back that the title, Imperialism versus Workers of the World, was a very, very apt title. And we have to remember imperialism is the economic and political domination by finance capital. And I think what all of our speakers have demonstrated today is whether we're talking about India, Africa, South America, Afghanistan, there is no age or gender or race barriers to imperialism's intention and intended control and domination of us and us workers around the world. One of the two themes have emerged from today for me, and that is the relationship between struggle and resistance. I think everyone has identified that we have a task, but as always in trying to achieve our task, we start where we are. So I think we start by talking about the movement, building our movement, building our class. I want to thank all the speakers, actually building a movement, our movement for our class, with our class. So I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank my technical support from Bill and Andy. But most of all, I want to thank all of you for participating, whether or not you're actually on the Zoom link or the Facebook link for William Poole or the other Facebook link that we've got set up. You are welcome. So onwards and upwards, comrades, our tasks are identified. Solidarity to all, and I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you.